You learned to read a room before you could read a book. You learned that your survival, your actual physical and emotional safety, depended not on being seen, but on becoming invisible at precisely the right moments. You learned to interpret the weight of a sigh, the cadence of footsteps coming down the hallway, the specific type of silence that meant danger was coiling itself in the next room. And you learned, with a precision that most children reserve for memorizing cartoon characters or playground games, exactly how much space you were allowed to take up. You learned to stay quiet. Not because you had nothing to say, not because you were naturally introverted or shy, but because silence became your armor, your camouflage, your most reliable strategy for making it through the day without becoming a target. Quietness was your superpower. It made you safe. It made you good. It made you forgettable in the moments when being remembered would have meant punishment, rage, or abandonment. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. The skill that saved you as a child becomes the prison that contains you as an adult. The same vigilance that kept you alive now keeps you from living. The same silence that protected you now suffocates you. You survived by learning to disappear, and now, decades later, you're still standing in rooms full of people, screaming on the inside, entirely mute on the outside, wondering why no one sees you, why no one asks, why you feel like a ghost in your own life. This is the core paradox. You became a master of survival, and in doing so, you lost the ability to truly exist. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not too sensitive or overthinking it. You are someone who learned an extraordinary skill under extraordinary circumstances, and now that skill has outlived its usefulness. The question is no longer, how do I stay quiet to survive? The question is, how do I learn to speak when silence is all I've ever known? This is the psychology of a child who learned to stay quiet to survive. And this is what happens when that child grows up. Let's start with what actually happened to you, neurologically and developmentally, when you learned that silence equaled safety. What you experienced is called adaptive hypervigilance, a state in which your nervous system recalibrates its baseline threat detection to an environment that is unpredictable, volatile, or emotionally unsafe. Your brain, in its extraordinary wisdom, recognized that the adults around you were unreliable narrators of safety. So it took over. It began scanning constantly, monitoring tone, tracking mood, predicting outcomes. You became a psychological meteorologist, always watching for the next storm. This hypervigilance didn't just live in your mind, it literally rewired your brain. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection center, became overactive. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation, became underutilized. You existed in a chronic state of low-level fear, what trauma therapists call complex PTSD. Not from a single event, but from an environment of sustained unpredictability. You didn't have the luxury of being a child. You had to become a strategist. And here's the second layer. You weren't just quiet. You were engaging in what psychologists call fawning, a lesser-known trauma response that sits alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning is the act of becoming whatever the other person needs you to be in order to avoid conflict. It's shape-shifting. It's the erasure of your own needs, your own voice, your own preferences in real time, so that you don't disturb the fragile peace. Children who fawn become adults who people-please compulsively, who apologize for existing, who can't answer the question, "What do you want?" because they genuinely don't know anymore. Think of it this way. Imagine your personality as a house. In a safe environment, a child gets to build that house room by room, exploring interests, expressing opinions, making mistakes, being loud, being messy, being themselves. But you didn't get to build a house, you built a bunker. Narrow, functional, designed only to keep you safe. And now, as an adult, you're still living in that bunker, wondering why it feels so small, why you can't breathe, why there's no room for anyone else to truly enter. The third concept you need to understand is dissociation. When the external world is too painful, too chaotic, too threatening, the mind has an elegant solution. It leaves. Not physically, but psychologically. You learned to go away while staying present. To nod and smile while your consciousness floated somewhere near the ceiling. Dissociation allowed you to survive moments that would have otherwise shattered you. But the cost is this. You became estranged from yourself. You learned that your inner world, your feelings, your thoughts, your desires, was irrelevant. And decades later, you still don't trust your own internal experience. You still ask others what you should feel. You still second-guess your own reality. This is not personality. This is architecture, the structure your psyche built to survive an unlivable situation. And the tragedy is that long after you've left that situation, the architecture remains. Let me tell you what you lost. You lost the ability to take up space without guilt. You lost the right to be inconvenient. You lost the freedom to be angry, to be needy, to be imperfect. You lost your childhood, not in a single traumatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny erasures, 1,000 moments where you chose silence over self, safety over authenticity. You learned that love was conditional on your smallness. That acceptance required your invisibility. That belonging meant betraying yourself. And the cruelest part? You became so good at it that no one ever knew you were suffering. Teachers called you well-behaved. Relatives praised your maturity. Friends appreciated how easygoing you were. You were rewarded for your self-abandonment. And so you learned, deeply and permanently, that the only version of you that was acceptable was the one that made no demands, caused no trouble, needed nothing. Carl Jung wrote, "The psyche is not of today. Its ancestry goes back many millions of years. Individual consciousness is only the flower and the fruit of a season sprung from the perennial rhizome beneath the earth." What he meant was this: we are not just dealing with conscious choices. We are dealing with survival patterns encoded into the very roots of who we are. You carry what philosophers call ontological guilt, a sense of wrongness not tied to anything you did, but to the fact that you exist at all. You apologize for breathing too loudly, for needing help, for having feelings, for being seen. This is not humility. This is self-erasure, masquerading as virtue. And here's the invisible grief. You became an expert at reading everyone else's needs while completely abandoning your own. You can sense when someone is upset from across the room. You know what people need before they ask. But when someone turns to you and says, "What do you want?" you freeze. Because wanting was dangerous. Needing was punishable. Asking was rejection waiting to happen. So you stopped asking. You stopped wanting. You stopped needing. And in doing so, you stopped being a full human being. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of thrownness, the idea that we are thrown into circumstances we did not choose, and yet we must make meaning from them. You were thrown into an environment where silence was survival. But here's the profound truth. You are no longer in that environment. The war is over. But you're still living like it's happening. You're still in the bunker. You're still holding your breath. And the world around you, it doesn't know you're suffocating because you've become too good at pretending you can breathe. Let's talk about what this looks like now. Because the child who stayed quiet doesn't just disappear when you turn 18. They become the adult who lives in constant anticipatory anxiety. You are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Even in moments of peace, you can't relax. Your nervous system doesn't trust calm. It reads it as the silence before the storm. You scan your partner's face for micro-expressions of displeasure. You replay conversations obsessively, looking for where you might have said the wrong thing. You exist in a state of perpetual bracing, cannot tolerate conflict, even healthy conflict. Disagreement feels like annihilation. When someone is upset with you, it's not just uncomfortable, it's existential. You will twist yourself into knots to avoid confrontation. You will sacrifice your own boundaries, your own truth, to keep the peace. Because conflict, in your body's memory, means danger, and danger means you must disappear. Struggles with their own voice, even in low-stakes situations. Ordering at a restaurant feels high risk. Sending an email requires 3 drafts. Asking a clarifying question in a meeting feels like volunteering for humiliation. You are articulate in your head, but the moment you try to speak, the words tangle. Because speaking was never safe. And your body remembers. Overfunctions in relationships while simultaneously feeling invisible. You are the person everyone turns to. The therapist friend, the reliable one, the person who shows up, who listens, who helps. But when you're struggling, silence. Because you don't know how to ask for what you need without feeling like a burden. You give endlessly and then resent people for not seeing how much you're carrying. But you never told them. You expected them to just know, the way you always had to know. Experiences profound imposter syndrome and self-doubt. Even when you succeed, you feel like a fraud. Because you learned that you had to be perfect to be tolerated. Anything less than perfect meant you were too much, too difficult, too broken. So you achieve, you excel, you perform, and still feel empty. Because the achievement isn't for you. It's to prove you deserve to exist. Has an inability to rest without guilt. Rest feels like failure. Doing nothing feels dangerous. Because productivity was how you earned your place. Usefulness was your currency. And if you stop being useful, what are you? You don't have hobbies. You have compulsions. You don't relax. You collapse. Attracts or tolerates relationships with people who replicate the original dynamic. You find yourself in friendships or romantic relationships with people who are emotionally volatile, unavailable, or who require you to stay small. Not because you're weak, but because this dynamic is familiar. Your nervous system recognizes it, and in a strange way, it feels like home. The dysfunction is predictable, and predictable, even when painful, feels safer than unknown. These are not personality flaws. These are adaptations. They are the brilliant, desperate strategies of a child who had no other options. But here's what you need to understand. You are no longer that child. You are an adult with agency, with choices, with the power to leave situations that harm you. But your nervous system doesn't know that yet. It's still operating from the old programming. The work, the deep, difficult, necessary work, is teaching your body that it's safe to be seen, that your voice will not be punished, that taking up space will not result in abandonment. This is not intellectual work. You can't think your way out of this. You have to feel your way through it. You have to learn to witness your own pain without immediately dismissing it, without saying other people had it worse, without gaslighting yourself into silence again. You have to learn that the instinct to shrink is not truth. It's memory, and memory can be rewritten. So how do you heal from this? First, you have to grieve. You have to acknowledge what was taken from you. Not to wallow, not to blame, but to witness. You were a child who deserved to be loud, messy, imperfect, and still loved. You were a child who deserved to take up space, and you didn't get that. That is a loss, and loss requires mourning before it can be released. Second, you begin the practice of reparenting yourself. This is not metaphor. This is practical, daily work. You speak to yourself the way you needed to be spoken to as a child, with gentleness, with patience, with unconditional permission to exist. When the instinct to shrink arises, you pause and ask, what would I say to a frightened child right now? And then you say that to yourself. Third, you practice what trauma therapists call titration. Small, manageable doses of the thing that scares you. You don't leap from silence to shouting. You practice speaking in low-stakes environments. You start saying no to small requests. You practice stating a preference. You build the muscle of your own voice slowly, carefully, with compassion for how hard this is. Fourth, you engage in somatic work, reconnecting with your body, because the silence lives in your body, not just your mind. You practice breath work. You practice grounding. You notice where the tightness lives, in your throat, your chest, your stomach, and you breathe into it. You learn to feel again, instead of just thinking. And fifth, you choose softness as rebellion. You refuse to be hard on yourself the way the world was hard on you. You refuse to replicate the conditions of your survival. You practice radical self-compassion. You practice letting yourself be imperfect, inconvenient, needy. Because that is what it means to be human. The psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You cannot change what happened, but you can change what happens next. You can choose to be the person who speaks, who takes up space, who exists loudly, messily, authentically. This will feel unnatural. It will feel selfish. It will feel terrifying. That's how you know it's working. Because you are stepping outside the bunker. You are building a house with windows, with doors, with room for others, and, most importantly, room for yourself. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be seen. You need to be heard. And most of all, you need to learn that you are always worth seeing, always worth hearing, even when the world told you otherwise. The child who learned to stay quiet to survive did what they had to do. But the adult you've become, you get to choose differently. You get to speak. You get to exist. You get to be whole. And that is the most courageous thing you will ever do. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more essays on the psychology of survival and healing. And remember, your silence kept you safe once, but your voice will set you free.